The lake was calm that morning, its surface smooth like glass reflecting the tall trees that surrounded it. A soft wind moved through the pines carrying the scent of water and fresh grass. For most people living in that quiet lakeside neighborhood, mornings like this were the reason they'd moved there. Peace, quiet, and the kind of beauty that didn't need much to make life feel full. But things were a little different when Daniel moved in. He was new to the neighborhood, having bought one of the older cabins near the far side of the lake. The cabin had been empty for years, and when he bought it, most of the locals assumed he was just another city guy trying to find peace. But Daniel wasn't like that. He worked with his hands, spoke politely, and didn't seem interested in anyone's business but his own. Every day after work, Daniel would head down to his dock where an old wooden boat sat tied to a post. It looked like something from another time, solid, classic, and made with care. The paint was chipped, the motor looked outdated, and the wooden seats had seen better days. But to Daniel it was something special. He'd found it abandoned in a storage lot, bought it cheap, and spent weeks restoring it piece by piece. To him, the boat wasn't just a hobby. It was a reminder of his late father, who used to take him fishing on a similar lake when he was a boy. Working on it helped him reconnect with those memories. So every evening he'd be out there sanding, painting, or adjusting something on the motor. Most neighbors didn't mind. They liked seeing someone bring new life to an old boat. But not everyone saw it that way. Across the road lived Karen, a woman who had earned a certain reputation in the area. She wasn't officially in charge of anything, but she liked to act like she was. If a lawn was too tall, she complained. If someone parked slightly off the curb, she made a scene. People called her the rule book with legs. When Karen noticed Daniel's boat for the first time, she frowned. From her window, she could see him working on it for hours. Tools scattered around, paint cans on the dock. It didn't take long for her to decide that whatever he was doing, it probably wasn't allowed. One morning, she walked her little dog past Daniel's property and stopped to watch. Daniel was bent over the motor, wiping his hands on a rag. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp like she was already angry. Daniel looked up and smiled politely. "Good morning." Karen crossed her arms. "You know that kind of boat isn't permitted here, right? It's way too big for this lake." Daniel blinked, a little surprised. "I wasn't aware there were restrictions. I've checked the local regulations. Everything seems fine." Karen shook her head. "Well, our homeowners association has rules about things like that. You can't just park an oversized boat like that on the water. It ruins the view." He could tell right away that she wasn't just making conversation. She was starting a fight. Still, he kept his calm. "I'll look into it," he said. Karen didn't like that answer. "You should do that soon. I'd hate to have to report it." With that, she tugged on her dog's leash and walked away, leaving Daniel standing there wondering what exactly she meant. Later that day, he mentioned it to his neighbor across the street, an older man named Paul who had lived there for over 20 years. Paul laughed when Daniel told him what happened. "Don't worry about her," Paul said, shaking his head. "She's been complaining about something ever since I moved here. Last month it was the mailboxes. Before that, she wanted to ban outdoor grills because she said they attract birds. She's harmless, just noisy," Daniel nodded. But deep down, he had a feeling this wasn't the end of it. Over the next few days, he kept working on his boat, trying to ignore the occasional glare from across the street. He could feel Karen's eyes on him from her window. Sometimes she'd even walk her dog a little slower just to linger nearby. It didn't bother him much until the day he finally took the boat out on the lake. It was a bright Saturday morning, perfect weather for testing the engine. He untied the ropes, pushed off the dock, and slowly made his way into the open water. The motor hummed quietly, and for the first time in months, Daniel felt a deep sense of peace. But that peace didn't last long. Half an hour later, he heard shouting from the shore. When he looked back, he saw Karen standing on her dock, waving her phone in the air. "Hey, you can't do that," she yelled. "That boat isn't allowed." Daniel slowed the engine and turned back toward his cabin. As he got closer, he realized she was recording him. "Good morning again," he said calmly as he stepped onto his dock. "Don't good morning me," she snapped. "I told you the rules. You can't have that boat here. It's against HOA policy." Daniel set the rope back on the post and looked her in the eye. "There's no HOA rule about boats, ma'am." "I checked," she scoffed. "Then I'll call the authorities." "You'll see." With that, she stormed back toward her house, muttering under her breath about people who think they can do whatever they want. Daniel didn't respond. He just sighed and looked back at the calm lake. All he wanted was to enjoy some quiet time, not deal with neighborhood drama. Still, a small part of him wondered why she cared so much. That evening, he sat on his porch watching the sunset. The lake turned golden, the trees casting long shadows across the water. For a moment, it felt peaceful again, but that peace was fragile. Deep down, Daniel knew this was just the beginning. Karen wasn't the kind of person to drop things easily. And sure enough, as darkness settled over the lake, the sound of her voice carried faintly across the water. She was on the phone, talking loudly, and one phrase stood out clearly in the quiet night. "I'm reporting him first thing in the morning." Daniel closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled faintly to himself. He didn't know yet how far she was willing to go, or how badly her plan was about to backfire. But one thing was certain: she had picked the wrong person to challenge. The next morning was bright and calm. The lake shimmered in the early sunlight, but for Daniel, the peace didn't last long. Around 9 o'clock, a silver SUV stopped in front of his cabin. He looked up from his coffee and sighed quietly when he saw Karen step out, wearing dark sunglasses and holding a clipboard. She walked toward his dock with the same determination she'd had yesterday. Her little dog followed, barking at every step. "Morning again," Daniel said, trying to sound calm. Karen didn't bother replying to his greeting. "I just came from the HOA office," she announced proudly. "I filed a report about your boat. They said they'll be looking into it immediately." Daniel placed his coffee cup down. "I appreciate the update," he said. "But you might want to check. This lake isn't under HOA control. It's not even part of the neighborhood association's property lines." Karen's eyes narrowed. "That's not what I heard. Everything around here is managed by the HOA, including the lake. You can't just do whatever you want." Daniel gave a patient smile. "I'm pretty sure that's not the case, but you're welcome to check again." She frowned. "Oh, I'll check. Don't worry about that." With that, she turned sharply and walked back to her car. Her tires crunched the gravel as she sped off, leaving Daniel standing there, shaking his head. Later that afternoon, he decided to go for a short boat ride to clear his head. The water was calm and there was a light breeze. He eased the engine to life and let the boat drift across the quiet lake. For him, it wasn't just a boat, it was his escape from noise, from stress, from people like Karen. As he floated near the center of the lake, he could see the houses surrounding the water, their docks stretching into the gentle ripples. He smiled, enjoying the view, not realizing that from one of those docks, Karen was watching again, this time with her phone pointed right at him. When Daniel returned to his dock, his phone buzzed with a message from Paul, the friendly neighbor. "Hey," the text read, "looks like Karen just posted about you in the community group." Daniel chuckled, then opened the app. Sure enough, there it was, a long post with the title, "Neighbor Violating HOA Rules with Dangerous Boat." Karen had uploaded several pictures of Daniel's boat, claiming it was too big, unsafe, and a visual nuisance. She even wrote that it was disturbing the wildlife. The comments were already filling up. Some neighbors supported her, saying the HOA should keep things in check. But others quickly defended Daniel, pointing out that his boat wasn't causing any harm. Paul commented, "That lake isn't under HOA control. You might want to check your info before accusing people." Still, Karen doubled down, replying, "I've spoken to management. Action will be taken." Daniel laughed quietly and put his phone away. He didn't want to get into online drama. He had no interest in arguing with someone who clearly just wanted attention, but as the day went on, things got more interesting. Around evening, Daniel saw a white pickup truck stop near Karen's driveway. Two people got out, both wearing jackets with the county's environmental department logo. They spoke with her for a while, and Daniel could see her pointing toward his property several times. After a few minutes, the two officials walked toward Daniel's dock. He stood to greet them politely. "Afternoon," one of them said. "We received a complaint about a boat possibly leaking oil into the lake." Daniel nodded. "You're welcome to take a look," he said, leading them to the dock. They checked the water, the motor, and the surface around the boat. Everything was clean. "This looks perfectly fine," one of them said. "You've got a classic motor here, well maintained." Daniel nodded. "I take good care of it." The officials thanked him for his time and walked back toward Karen's house. He saw them speaking with her again, and from the distance it was clear she wasn't happy. Her arms were waving, her voice carrying across the water even though he couldn't hear the exact words. That night, the neighborhood chat group went quiet. No one wanted to say much, but everyone knew what had happened. Karen's complaint had turned into embarrassment. Still, Daniel had a feeling she wouldn't stop there. People like her didn't back down easily. The next day, he was proven right. Around lunchtime, he heard someone knocking hard on his door. When he opened it, there stood Karen again, red-faced and flustered. "You think this is funny, don't you?" she said, glaring. "Excuse me?" Daniel asked. "You called the environmental guys and told them I made a false report." "I didn't call anyone," Daniel said calmly. "They showed up on their own. You made the report yourself, remember?" Karen folded her arms, trying to hold her ground. "Well, the HOA will handle it. You'll see." Daniel took a slow breath. "Karen, listen. The HOA doesn't manage this lake. I promise you. You might be wasting your time." She gave him a cold stare. "We'll see about that." Then she turned and walked away again, mumbling something about people who think they're above the rules. When she was gone, Daniel sat down on the porch steps and chuckled quietly. Paul walked over from across the street with a grin. "She really doesn't give up, does she?" Paul said. "Nope," Daniel replied. "She's got energy, I'll give her that," Paul laughed. "You're taking it well. Most people would have snapped by now." Daniel smiled faintly. "I learned a long time ago it's better to stay calm and let people show who they really are." That evening, the air was cooler. The lake reflected the pink and orange colors of the sunset. Daniel sat at the edge of his dock, legs hanging over the water, feeling the gentle movement beneath him. He thought about how strange it was, how something as simple as a boat could cause this much noise in a peaceful neighborhood. But he wasn't angry. If anything, he was curious. He wanted to know why Karen cared so much, what drove her to act like she did. Maybe it was loneliness, or maybe she just needed control over something. Either way, he didn't plan on fighting her. He just didn't know yet that her obsession was about to go even further. She was already preparing her next move, one that would end up exposing a truth she never saw coming. And by the time she learned who really owned the lake she kept complaining about, it would be far too late to take any of it back. For a few days, things were quiet around the lake. The sun came up, the water stayed calm, and Daniel hoped maybe, just maybe, the drama had passed. He spent his morning sitting on the dock with a cup of coffee, watching fish jump near the surface. Sometimes Paul would stop by and they'd talk about fishing or the weather. Life felt normal again, but peace never lasted long when it came to Karen. It started with small things. A few new signs appeared at the neighborhood entrance, handwritten and taped to the bulletin board. "No large boats allowed on Community Lake." Another one said, "Respect HOA rules. Keep the lake safe." Daniel smiled when he saw them. He could almost hear Karen's voice behind those words. Then one afternoon, while he was adjusting the boat motor, he heard her outside again, talking loudly on the phone. Her voice carried easily across the quiet yards. "Yes, I'm calling again," she said. "The HOA told me it's out of their hands, but there must be someone who can do something. The lake has to have a manager, right?" Daniel chuckled quietly and shook his head. He didn't even have to look up. He knew who she was talking to. Over the next few days, Karen made it her mission to get to the bottom of things. She called local offices, searched online, and even stopped people during her morning walks to ask if they knew who really owned the lake. One morning, she caught Paul outside raking leaves. "You've lived here the longest," she said. "Who owns this lake?" "It can't just belong to nobody," Paul shrugged. "I think it's private property," he said. "Always has been. Private?" she repeated. "So someone actually owns it?" "Pretty sure," Paul said casually. "You'd have to check the records to see who, though." Karen nodded slowly, her face tightening with determination. "Oh, I'll find out," she said. That same afternoon, she drove to the county office. The clerk at the front desk, a kind middle-aged woman, looked up when Karen marched in, papers in hand. "I need to know who owns the lake by Willow Point," Karen said firmly. "It's important. Someone is using it improperly." The clerk smiled politely. "Sure thing, ma'am. Just a moment." She turned to her computer and typed for a few seconds. Then she frowned slightly. Karen leaned forward. What is it?" The clerk looked up. "It's not owned by the county," she said. The property and the water rights are privately held. Karen blinked. Privately held by who? The clerk scrolled a little more, then read the name aloud. Let's see. Registered under Daniel Harris. For a few seconds, Karen didn't move. She just stood there, her mouth slightly open, eyes fixed on the clerk. Wait, she said finally. What did you say? The lake and surrounding land are owned by a Mr. Daniel Harris, the clerk repeated gently.
He purchased the rights about 2 years ago. Karen's face turned pale.
She stepped back, suddenly unsure of what to do. That can't be right, she muttered. He just moved here a few months ago. The clerk shook her head. Well, the paperwork says otherwise. Maybe he lived nearby before. Either way, the lake is his property. Karen left the office without another word. On her drive home, her mind was spinning. She replayed every argument, every complaint, every time she had told Daniel he wasn't allowed to use his own boat. The embarrassment hit her in waves. She had spent weeks trying to get him in trouble, and he had quietly let her go on, never saying a word. When she pulled into her driveway, she saw Daniel on his dock, fixing a rope. For a moment, she thought about walking over to apologize, but pride stopped her. She quickly went inside and shut the blinds. That evening, the news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Paul was the first to mention it. He told a few neighbors, and within hours, everyone seemed to know. Did you hear? The new guy owns the whole lake, so are you serious? Yep. Karen was trying to report him, and it turns out she was complaining to the owner himself. By sunset, half the neighborhood was laughing about it. Not in a mean way, just in that quiet, knowing way small communities do when someone gets caught in their own mess. Daniel, meanwhile, didn't say a word. He kept to himself, pretending not to notice the new looks of respect and amusement that people gave him as they walked by. That night he sat on his porch again, the sound of crickets filling the air. Paul walked over with 2 bottles of soda and a grin. You really weren't going to tell her, huh? Paul said, handing him a drink. Daniel laughed softly. Didn't see the point. She would have found out eventually. Paul chuckled. Well, she sure found out today. You should have seen her face when she came back from the county office. Looked like she'd seen a ghost. Daniel smiled and took a sip of his drink. I'm not trying to embarrass her. I just want some peace. I get that, Paul said. But still, that's poetic justice if I've ever seen it. For a long moment, they sat quietly, watching the reflection of the moon on the water. Across the lake, a light flickered in Karen's house. She was pacing by the window, talking on her phone again, but this time her voice was quiet. No shouting, no anger. Maybe she was finally realizing what she'd done. The next morning, Daniel woke up early. When he stepped outside, he noticed something strange. The signs Karen had posted near the entrance were gone. The bulletin board was empty again. He smiled a little, guessing who had taken them down. Later that day, while he was washing the boat, he saw Karen walking her dog near the water. She slowed down when she reached his dock. For a second, it looked like she wanted to say something, but she hesitated. Her face softened a bit. Daniel gave a small nod. Morning, he said gently. Karen managed a tight smile. Morning. Then she kept walking, her dog trotting beside her. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was something. As Daniel watched her disappear down the path, he couldn't help but feel a mix of amusement and relief. The lake was finally quiet again, and now everyone knew who truly kept it that way. He looked out at the water, the ripples catching the sunlight, and felt a sense of calm settle in his chest. After all the noise and complaints, everything had come full circle, and though he'd never planned it this way, the truth had a funny way of finding people, especially those who needed a little reminder that not everything in life needs to be controlled. A few days passed, and the story about Karen and the lake spread faster than anyone expected. People around the neighborhood couldn't stop talking about it. Some tried to keep their laughter quiet when they saw her, while others just shook their heads, amazed at how far she had gone without knowing the truth. Karen, meanwhile, kept mostly to herself. The woman who once walked her dog 3 times a day and waved her clipboard around was now hardly seen. Her curtains stayed closed, her car didn't move much, and her name disappeared from the community chat group. Daniel didn't take any pleasure in her embarrassment. He wasn't the type to enjoy someone else's downfall. If anything, he almost felt sorry for her. He knew what it was like to act out of pride and realized too late that you'd gone too far. Still, he couldn't deny how much quieter the neighborhood had become. For the first time in weeks, the air around the lake felt peaceful again. One Sunday morning, Daniel was cleaning his dock when Paul came by holding a cup of coffee. "Morning, boss of the lake," Paul joked, grinning. Daniel laughed. "Don't start that again." "Oh, come on," Paul said. "You can't blame people for finding it funny. Karen's been bossing everyone around for years, and now she finds out the guy she's yelling at actually owns the place. That's the best story this town's had in a long time." Daniel smiled but said nothing. He didn't like to brag. "By the way," Paul continued, "a few of us are planning a community cleanup next weekend. We thought we'd make it official since, well, it's your lake." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That's a good idea. I'll help organize it. Might be nice to bring everyone together again." Paul raised an eyebrow. "Even Karen?" Daniel chuckled softly. "If she wants to come, she's welcome. Maybe this will be a good way to move on." During the week, flyers appeared on mailboxes inviting everyone to the lake cleanup and picnic day. The event was meant to be simple, just neighbors helping each other, sharing food, and spending time by the water. Most people were excited. They hadn't had a friendly gathering in years. Karen got the flyer, too. She stood in her kitchen reading it in silence. Part of her wanted to tear it up and throw it away, but another part of her felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Guilt. She didn't want to admit it, but she knew she'd been wrong. And worse, she knew everyone else knew it too. Every time she went outside, she felt the weight of people's quiet smiles, the looks that said, "We know what happened." That Friday evening, she decided to swallow her pride. She baked a batch of cookies, packed them into a container, and told herself she would bring them to the event. Maybe, just maybe, she could start over. When Saturday came, the lake looked beautiful. The sun was bright. Kids were playing near the water, and the smell of barbecue filled the air. Daniel had set up tables along the dock with drinks and snacks. People laughed and talked freely, the kind of easy warmth that had been missing for too long. When Karen finally arrived, holding her container of cookies, a few heads turned. Conversations quieted for a moment, but no one said anything rude. Daniel noticed her from across the dock. He walked over, smiling gently. "Hey there," he said. "Glad you came." Karen hesitated, clearly nervous. I just wanted to drop these off," she said, holding out the container. "I made too many anyway." Daniel accepted it politely. "They look great. You should stay a while." She gave a small, awkward smile. "I don't want to bother anyone." "You're not bothering anyone," Daniel said kindly. "It's a community event. You're part of the community." Karen looked around. Some people were watching, some pretending not to. She felt her face grow warm, but Daniel's calm tone made it a little easier. "Listen," he continued quietly. "You don't have to say anything about what happened. It's done. I know you care about this place, and even if you show it differently." Karen blinked, surprised by his words. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. "I really didn't know," she finally said softly. "I thought I was just doing the right thing." Daniel nodded. "I believe you." She looked down. "I guess I went a little too far." "A little," Daniel said with a small smile. Karen couldn't help but laugh. It was the first time she'd laughed in weeks. They stood there for a moment, the air between them lighter than before. Then Daniel gestured toward the crowd. "Come on, join us. There's plenty of food." Karen hesitated again, then slowly followed him toward the tables. A few neighbors greeted her politely, some even teasing her gently, but not in a mean way. As the afternoon went on, people started to relax. Laughter filled the air, and the tension that had once hung over the neighborhood finally started to fade. Later, while everyone was cleaning up, Paul leaned over to Daniel and said, "You handled that better than anyone else would have." Daniel shrugged. "No point in holding grudges. Life's too short for that." Paul nodded. "Still, not everyone would be that forgiving." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes people just need a chance to learn. She's not a bad person, just someone who got lost trying to be right." As the sun began to set, the lake shimmered gold again. Kids chased each other near the water, and neighbors sat in small groups talking and laughing. Karen was there too, sitting quietly with a few others, smiling for the first time in a long while. When most people had left, Daniel stood alone on his dock, watching the last light fade over the water. It felt peaceful again, the kind of peace he had always hoped for when he first moved there. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Karen standing a few feet away. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said softly.
For not.
You know, holding it against me. Daniel smiled gently. You're welcome. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what we do after. Karen nodded slowly. You're right. She turned to look at the lake, the surface reflecting the fading pink sky. It really is beautiful here, she said. I never stop to just enjoy it. Daniel followed her gaze. It is, and it's meant to be shared. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was still, the sound of frogs starting up in the distance. Then Karen smiled again, a real one this time, and walked back toward her house. Daniel stayed a while longer, watching the quiet water ripple under the evening light. For the first time since moving there, he felt like the lake wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who respected it. And maybe, just maybe, that was how it was meant to be. The weeks after the whole lake incident felt peaceful again. The arguments, the shouting, the tension, it all faded slowly like ripples after a boat passes. Daniel was back to doing what he loved most, working on his boat, fixing small details, polishing the wood until it shined like glass. Every morning, he would walk down to the dock with a cup of coffee in hand, enjoying the soft sound of water brushing against the shore. For him, that calm was priceless. The neighborhood had changed too. People who once barely nodded at him now waved from their porches or stopped by to chat. Some were still a little shy after hearing how Karen had embarrassed herself, but most were friendly. They liked Daniel's calm way of handling things.
He didn't yell, didn't try to humiliate anyone.
He just stood his ground, and that seemed to earn everyone's respect. One afternoon, a few neighbors came by while Daniel was adjusting the ropes on his boat. They brought homemade pie and cold drinks, laughing as they told stories about how strict Karen used to be. One of them said, I think she learned her lesson this time. Never mess with the guy who owns the lake. Everyone laughed, including Daniel. He wasn't the kind of man who held grudges, but he couldn't deny. It felt nice to have people see the truth for themselves. Karen, on the other hand, had been keeping quiet. For a while, no one saw her outside. Her blinds stayed closed and her car barely moved from the driveway. It seemed she was trying to stay out of the spotlight until people forgot what happened. But of course, in a small community, stories don't disappear so easily. The moment anyone brought up the lake or boat, someone would mention her outburst. A few weeks later, Karen finally appeared again. It was a Saturday morning. Daniel was cleaning his boat when he heard hesitant footsteps on the dock. When he turned around, he saw her standing there holding a small box of muffins. Her usual confident tone was gone. Instead, she looked nervous, almost embarrassed. Hi, she said quietly. I just wanted to stop by and apologize for everything. I didn't know you owned the lake. I thought you were breaking the rules and I guess I got carried away. Daniel smiled politely. It's all right, he said. Misunderstandings happen. But next time, maybe just ask before assuming the worst. Karen nodded quickly. You're right. I really am sorry. She placed the box on the dock and stepped back. I baked these myself. I thought it was the least I could do. He thanked her and accepted the gesture, though he could tell she wanted to disappear as soon as possible. She turned and walked back home quietly. Daniel watched her go, thinking how different she looked. Less like the controlling neighbor everyone feared, and more like someone who realized she'd gone too far. Over the next few weeks, the lake became livelier than ever. Daniel started organizing small community events. He invited neighbors to come fishing, let kids learn how to row boats, and even hosted a weekend cleanup drive where everyone worked together to collect trash and make the shoreline look beautiful again. People loved it. The lake wasn't just a body of water anymore, it became the heart of the community. Even Karen showed up once. She kept her distance, bringing her little dog along and sitting quietly on a bench. She didn't speak much, but Daniel noticed her smiling when the children played near the water. Maybe, he thought, she was learning to let go of control and just enjoy being part of something good. Months passed, and the story of the boat incident slowly turned into a neighborhood legend. New families moving in would sometimes hear whispers of it. Someone would always chuckle and say, "Oh, you'll love it here. Just don't tell the lake owner what kind of boat to use." Everyone would laugh, and Daniel would shake his head with a grin. Life around the lake settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings were filled with birds singing and the smell of coffee. Afternoons brought the hum of engines and the laughter of kids splashing near the shore. Evenings were calm, the sun dipping low over the water while golden light reflected off the ripples. Daniel often sat on the dock at sunset, thinking about how things had changed. When he first moved there, he just wanted peace and quiet. He never expected to become the center of attention, or to own something that brought people together. But in a way, the chaos with Karen had turned into something positive. It taught everyone a lesson about kindness, patience, and how small misunderstandings can grow when people jump to conclusions. One evening, as he watched the sky turn orange, an older neighbor joined him. The man said, "You know, I've lived here for 20 years and I've never seen folks come together like this before." "You did something good, Daniel." Daniel smiled softly. "I think we all did," he replied. "Sometimes it just takes a little storm to remind people what calm feels like." The two men sat quietly, watching the water shimmer in the fading light. Across the lake, Karen's porch light flickered on. She stood there for a moment, then waved. Daniel raised his hand and waved back. That simple gesture said everything. It wasn't about ownership or rules or pride anymore. It was about neighbors learning to respect one another and sharing the same space with kindness. As night settled in, Daniel locked up his boat and headed home, feeling grateful. The world outside might be noisy and complicated, but here, by his lake, things finally felt right. The air was cool, the stars were bright, and for the first time in a long while, everyone in the neighborhood seemed to understand the value of peace. And though the story of the woman who tried to report the boat owner would always bring a few laughs, it also carried a quiet reminder: sometimes, the calmest person in the room is the one who holds the most power, not because of money or ownership, but because they choose patience over anger. Daniel never bragged about what happened. He didn't need to. Every time he looked across the still water and saw his neighbors smiling, he knew the lake had given him something more than property. It had given him a home,